The central government recently introduced a bill in the parliament to amend the 1995 Waqf Act. This aims to enhance accountability and transparency in the functioning of Waqf boards and ensure mandatory inclusion of women. This initiative responds to demands from within the Muslim community and includes around 40 amendments. The bill mandates mandatory verification for property claims by Waqf boards and revises sections of the Act to change the composition and functioning of the boards, incorporating women's representation. Now, key amendments include mandatory verification of property claims and revisions to the composition and functioning of Waqf boards to ensure better governance. Let's get some voices from both sides of the political spectrum who have aired their views inside the parliament as well as outside over the amendment of the Waqf Act. Smriti Irani, who is the former Union Minister for Minority Affairs and the BJP leader, joining me on the telecast right now. Thank you, Smriti Irani, for joining us. And my first question to you, do you think this act is not just a major land reform, but also one for inclusivity within the Muslim community? You had earlier also spoken as the Union Minister, flagging the resolution on Ahmadiyyas.
I think that to look at the Waqf board only from the perspective of property would be a bit myopic. There have been Waqf boards that have been known to transgress into judicial and legal territories which actually are not their functions. I can give you the example of Telangana Waqf board, which is doing divorces and marriages and khulas. There have been complaints by women that to avoid the triple talaq ban, many men have gotten their marriages annulled and women have been running from pillar to post to get justice. There have been, of course, as you've said, the issue of the Andhra Pradesh Waqf board, which converted a fatwa into a board resolution, thereby declaring that Ahmadiyyas are non-Muslims. Now, that is not the function of the board to declare whether somebody is a Muslim or a non-Muslim. There have been instances where reporters and the media itself has reported how properties of poor Muslims have been usurped by their mutawallis, that is the managers of the estate, where they have sold it in cash and black money in cahoots with certain board members. Now, what the government today has proposed is to ensure that there is more efficacy with regards to the functionality of the board, that there is more transparency as to how the board serves the cause of the Muslim community. Women now will have a respectful designation, a place for themselves on the board. Also, that the Waqf's earning can now be used for widow Muslim women, for divorced Muslim women. The rights of inheritance of Muslim women now will be protected. That is the proposal of the government. Muslims who did not have the legal recourse of approaching, or anybody for that matter, to appeal against the decision of a tribunal or a Waqf board, now have, under the new bill that is being proposed, the right to approach the High Court if they so desire. So I think that the proposal of the government today, after much deliberations with state governments, with state Waqf boards, and with Muslim community members, has been not only elaborately, I think it's a reflection of that engagement, but also the government's proposal to constitute the JPC shows that the government, still in a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, wants to ensure that every member of the opposition finds a voice in how this bill is then eventually passed.
Now, you've also addressed how this bill will empower Muslim women. We have seen record women Hajj pilgrims when you were the Union Minister for Minority Affairs. And on that note, how monumental do you think is this bill for women who could now be included in Waqf boards?
I think that it is historical from the context not only that women will have now a place on the Waqf board. What is also to be, I think, reflected upon is the fact that the inheritance rights of women will now have a legal provision to be protected. What is also, I think, one has to be mindful of the grace with which the board can now allow for the Waqf earnings to be used for the protection, for supporting the livelihoods of widowed Muslim women and divorced Muslim women, I think is very heartening. Yes, under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, we have seen that in the Hajj, now women without a male companion, as per Islamic law, are allowed to undertake the Hajj. That itself is a reform that was long awaited. The fact that in consonance of the Islamic faith and in consonance with the Constitution, these amendments today have been proposed by the government is a matter of great joy.
Why do you think the opposition is saying that there was no consultation that was had with the opposition members of parliament earlier?
That is the opposition's right to misguide and mistreat an issue, but I can publicly and personally confirm that a request for constant consultations on issues with regards to Waqf was not only sent out to every state government, but also to every state Waqf board. I've personally held meetings not only with state governments, with Waqf boards, which were not only evidenced in minutes of the meeting, but also videographed. I've also had the opportunity of engaging with the Ahmadiyya community, the Aga Khanis, the Bohra, Shia, Sunnis, women, on issues with regards to the challenges that they face with regards to the Waqf board. Also, officers of the Ministry of Minority Affairs themselves conducted many consultation meetings, not only with state governments, state boards, but also reached out to cities like Mumbai, like Lucknow for consultation on a larger, platform. So the opposition to say that we did not consult extensively is a wrongful charge. But I also feel today the government's proposal to constitute the JPC itself shows that after exhaustive consultation and research, the government has gone ahead and yet again provided a platform for even every member of the opposition to have their voice reflected in what penultimately I see will be passed in the House of Parliament.
So now, looking ahead, what happens to the land that is owned by the Waqf boards? Will there be a review that is going to be had?
I think one has to be very, very careful when one poses such a question, because the land is owned by the person who's creating the Waqf. The board is supposed to register the Waqf, and as to who owns that property from which the Waqf has been created. So there is a need for those who want to speak on the issue to look at the issue threadbare and read the amendments that are being proposed. What is being proposed by the government is, one, that the Waqf be created by somebody who practices Islam. There have been provisions under the Congress-led UPA's government's act which allowed for non-Muslims to create a Waqf, which by Islamic faith is disallowed. So I congratulate the government that it has taken out that provision and only restricted it to Muslims as per their faith. The other issue that needs reflection here is that apart from the person who owns the property who will create the Waqf, the board has to certify that the Waqf indeed has been registered with them. There have been many cases where people have said, this is my Waqf, but the board refuses to recognize me so that my land can be usurped. So those gaps that have become challenges for the Muslim community have been filled through this bill.
And does the Waqf Amendment Bill alongside Triple Talaq and Hajj without Mahram also goes on to prove that the current government is dedicated to work with Muslims for reforms within the community?
I think what this has proved is that the government has a ear to the ground, has had extensive deliberations, engagements with the Muslim community on the whole, that the government has taken out those who claim to be intermediaries of the faith and connected directly with the Muslim population across the country. That consultations also were undertaken with state governments highlight that the proposals through this bill today, and especially the fact that the state board has to be formed by the state government, in itself is a complement to the cooperative federalism agenda of the Prime Minister.
Now, the government has also taken several other steps to empower Muslim community, such as Garib Nawaz Employment Training Program, the Naya Savera scheme for skilling, and nonetheless, it is the opposition that continues to attack the government in the parliament. Do you think that is justified?
I think firstly the schemes that you're talking about are old schemes which have been refashioned under one umbrella for skilling. I also believe that the opposition has opposed the bill today only for the sake of opposition. That anybody who believes in supporting the cause of the Muslim community transparently will support the Ummeed bill of the Government of India.
All right, thank you for joining us, Smriti Irani, and sharing your views. Let's quickly get in. The opposition voice, it is Shashi Tharoor, who's Member of Parliament of the Congress, who's joining me on the telecast right now. Thank you so much for joining us. And my first question to you, sir, would be, should Waqf Board continue to have powers to claim property?
Well, look, the Waqf Board issue is a more complicated one than very specifically about one property or another. From our point of view, there are some real concerns about why the government is particularly interfering in the affairs of one particular religion. It's something that this government has tended to relish doing. And there are some very, very sincere concerns about this on the part of the general public, because for the opposition, it's not the business of the government to be worrying about how religious affairs are administered. And for the most part, getting the collector, for example, into making decisions about what's Waqf property or not is not the collector's business. This is charity given by Muslims to their own religious bodies. Secondly, there's some real concerns about federalism. In any case under our constitution, these are issues that should be dealt with in many cases by the states. Third, where there are disputes, as your question implies it could be, when there are disputes, you have a judiciary to deal with it. Why do we now have to empower a district collector with powers over this particular body that the collector doesn't have over similar bodies of other religions? There's a whole question about why when you don't, for example, have a non-Hindu on the Devaswam boards in my state that oversee temples, while you can have non-Muslims in the council that oversees Waqf. So these are all questions that are very legitimately raised. And then you can have also constitutional legal questions about whether the freedom of religion enshrined in Articles 25 to 30 of the Constitution would not be affected if the government starts telling Muslims how to organize themselves in this manner.
Okay, now, stating one specific example. Now, one of the Waqf courts had recently ruled the Burhanpur fort to be Waqf property. The High Court then intervened and asked if Waqf should also claim the Taj Mahal as Waqf property. In this particular case, do you think the Waqf Board misused its powers?
Look, I mean, I am not going to pronounce myself on any individual case without studying it in detail, which I have not had the opportunity to do. But I will say that where there are problems, indeed, we should let the courts come up with a conclusion, and the court conclusion will not be affected one way or the other by whether this law has been amended again or not. No, I mean, I don't see why this particular bill was necessary. If there are problems that the courts are dealing with, let them deal with it.
Do you in principle agree that there is a need for reform in Waqf Act, even if in practice you have disagreement with the proposed changes?
No, I'm not sure it's necessary. We've done a lot of amendments as recently as 2013. There normally needs to be a series of cases or other problems that indicate that the law was inadequate. Those earlier amendments made to the 1995 Act have relatively brought it up to date in practice. And to the best of my knowledge, there have been no major complaints. And if there are complaints beyond those of individual disputes, which of course should be settled in the courts, I don't know, because there's certainly been very little out there, and you can do a Google and confirm to me if you like, that would suggest that the general public or the Muslim community at large or whoever has been saying that this law is manifestly inadequate. In fact, one of the things that mystified many of the MPs who know the subject well is why on earth this bill was necessary in the first place. What crisis had warranted the government spending its time and effort to come up with such a bill?
Now, one of the issues that you mentioned with the proposed amendment is the inclusion of non-Muslims in the Waqf Board. What other issues, glaring problems within them do you see in the proposed amendment made by the government?
Well, as I've said, first of all, we are concerned about the violation of secularism, about the rights of individuals as enshrined in the Constitution to freely profess, practice, and propagate their own religion, to establish and maintain institutions of their own religion for both religious and charitable purposes, and of course about the far-reaching powers that are sought to be given to the district collector over the affairs of one religion. On top of that, there is a fact that it's suddenly going to put very explicitly two non-Muslims into a body that oversees the work of a purely Muslim charitable organization. Not clear why, and whether there is any equivalent for that in any other faith. And then finally, there is this whole business of even in some cases, the collector supplanting the judiciary. So there's a whole bunch of questions. I should have said that, of course, there's also perhaps by comparison with these big issues, a fairly small one, but still, under Article 30, a religious minority can establish and administer its own educational institutions, and many of these Waqf boards run madrasas. Now, suddenly the collector decides that a Waqf property is actually government property and not the Waqf's. Is government suddenly going to be denying the Muslim community the right to run a madrasa? Or worse still, is the government going to be in the business of running madrasas? All of this doesn't seem to have been thought through. Anyway, as you know, they're going to refer the entire matter to a parliamentary committee. And it'll be good to have the views of a whole cross-section of MPs of very different parties in different parts of the country who can air their views that the government will then have to take into consideration before bringing the bill back to the main parliament.
Okay, you've spoken about the madrasas and taking a look at the larger picture. Do you think Muslim institutions like the madrasas, the marriage laws, the Waqf board require modernization and reform?
Now, that's a wholly different issue. We certainly would agree that there are improvements that can be made. For example, when it comes to the madrasas, when I was in the education ministry, we were offering support from the central government to modernize their courses, introduce science, introduce mathematics, introduce subjects beyond religious instruction as part of the madrasa curriculum. That sort of thing is a kind of reform that I think would be, without encroaching on the right of the Muslim minority to have madrasas, to make sure that the madrasas are teaching skills and knowledge that will be useful to the kids when they come out of school, beyond just knowing the religious texts and principles. Now, that kind of reform I don't see would affect anybody's interest. I don't even see any objections from the Muslim community if the government were to support in this manner.
Now, according to you, which body group of individuals would be best representative of the voice of the Muslims in matters such as these?
I am not going to go into that, because if I start as a non-Muslim giving certificates to who's the best representative of the Muslims, I'd be very presumptuous indeed.
And do you think that the Congress party is best articulating the voice of Indian Muslims on Waqf, the Uniform Civil Code and other issues in the parliament?
No, we are there to represent the interests of Indians. We are not there to represent any one particular community. But to us, the very term Indians include all communities, including Muslims. We don't understand why, for this government, it is necessary to single out Muslims time after time on various issues. For example, sadly, there are many men of many communities who desert their wives and don't pay them support, don't pay them alimony, and so on. Why is it that only Muslim desertion is now criminalized, whereas other people of other religions abandoning their wives and not giving them support is merely a civil problem? There's another example where this whole government's legislative attitude has been fairly blatantly discriminatory. Similarly, CAA. Why is it that every religion is exempt from the every religion is included in the benefits of CAA, let's put it that way, and the only community exempt is the Muslim community? There's this particular, I would say, almost viciousness to the government's bitter rejection of Muslims as first-class citizens of India, which is unacceptable to us and to many other secular parties in the India bloc. We feel that the whole logic of India is that all communities and all religions should be treated alike. And to my mind, that's what this government is sadly failing to do in many of its actions.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, for joining me on the telecast and airing your views. Next up, we have Shazia Ilmi, who's the BJP national spokesperson, and we spoke to her about the Waqf Board. Thank you, Shazia, for joining us. And my big question, how big a win is this for Muslim women and the poorer, less privileged Muslim community, since the government is pushing for their representation in the Waqf Board?
I think it's very important for women to be there. And the unfortunate part is that all these years, we have seen just how rich the Waqf properties are. Imagine having properties to the worth of 9.54 acres, lakh acres. Imagine you have more than 9.5 lakh acres, which is part of the Waqf property. But when you look at Muslims as a religious group, you find them as the poorest, most economically and socially and educationally backward. Just imagine if these Waqf boards were doing their work as is their goal, which is well-being of the poor, how different things would have been for the same community. So I think this amendment was necessary, not just for women, but also for the very poor, marginalized Muslim who has no recourse whatsoever. Just imagine, we are looking at properties worth 1.2 lakh crores. Can you imagine what that money means? Can you imagine how many schools and colleges and hospitals and shelter homes we could have had? How many more children, Muslim children, could have had education, scholarship, and other provisions? So it is very unfortunate that there has been not just complete mismanagement, but arbitrary powers have been given according to the Act of 1995 by the Congress government, only to kind of attract them after the Babri Masjid demolition fiasco, and they wanted to attract Muslims back in the track, so they just gave unlimited powers. Can you imagine? I can't just take over your land. I can't just say that, oh, my grandfather prayed there, so your land is mine. So you have to decide. There is also a statute of limitation. How many years back do you want to go? You can't say that Shah Jahan gave his property to his daughter and now it's Waqf property. So and also by user, you can only give the property which has been given by your forefathers, and can't give anyone else's property to someone else. So there are many things that are very important and they needed to be changed.
How do you feel the bill streamlines the verification process and ease dispute resolution?
How do you do verification? We both can be locked in a battle as to this land is mine and that land is yours. But tell me, there has to be verification. So a revenue officer whose duty it is to actually ensure that there is verification and the land deed and title is checked and is verified, only then can it be registered. How can Waqf land not come under that ambit? Also, everything else, every dispute, you can seek remedy, except for this special act of 1995, according to which the tribunal's decision is final. That means there is no remedy. That means it doesn't matter. A poor Muslim can keep seeking claim to a particular land, piece of land, which is decided by a Waqf board and the tribunal that is someone else's, and he or she has no right to go to district court, high court, Supreme Court. So how can any law be more important than the Supreme Court and the Constitution of India? One can't understand that. And not just that, there's so many Muslim countries. You don't have any provision of a Waqf board handling properties in the manner that we have in India. Look at Turkey, look at Libya, look at Egypt, look at Jordan and Tunisia. There is no such body which works and regulates matters of property which are considered Waqf. So it is just the worst kind of means for corruption and to keep a few families in power and to leave the rest of the community in a state of despair, because the whole idea of Waqf is to reach out and help out and be available for those who need alms, who need charity. It's called Allah ki property, and you're supposed to help in charitable purposes.
What do we do with the properties that have already been claimed? For example, the Tiruchendu Rai village in Tamil Nadu, which was claimed by the Waqf?
So see, when we talk about the statute of limitation, when we talk about how many years are you willing to go back? I mean, you just can't say, like, this is what I answered. You can't just say 500. The village that you're talking about in Tamil Nadu, that particular district, there is a village, there is a temple which is 1500 years old. And a poor family member wanted to sell his land for his daughter's marriage, or he needed money. And he was told that the entire village, including the temple and all the houses in that village, are under the Waqf property. How has that happened? Where has that happened? What are the papers that substantiate or corroborate this? Nobody knows. It is a Waqf property, so you can't dispute it. So there has to be, and please, and this rumor mongering that is being done, that it's against Muslim, actually, it's for the poor Muslims. It's against some corrupt religious, zamidars and feudal lords who have usurped these lands, claiming them as Waqf, and are using them for their own gains. I will tell you, in 2018, Amanatullah, who took over the Waqf property, actually filed a case in the Anti-Corruption Bureau and proved that 62 bighas of land was given by the erstwhile, the former chairman, which was Haji Mateen and Harun Yusuf. And they gave 62 bighas of land, just for 1 crore donation, and leased it out for a long period for 25 paisa per unit. So that's how it's done. And then later on, the same Amanatullah, who became the Waqf Board chairperson, used it for his own gains, and then he was arrested for the same. So this is how it works. Chairman after chairman, party after party, they come to power, they use that as their own land, and it becomes like a land mafia. And the poor Muslim and the community member has no either remedy or recourse or any benefit whatsoever from the Waqf property, the idea of which is to provide insaf and justice, financial justice to the needy.
Now, is this a reform that will push inclusivity within the Muslim community?
See something like the Triple Talaq bill. I mean, something that is not even part of the Quran was being carried on in the name of religious practice in India for years. So the Muslim clerics in India were ready to go against the word of Quran only to keep the pernicious practices on. And it was BJP government which ensured that something that is in consonance with the spirit of not just the constitution but also Quran is done properly, and that women are given justice. Similarly, even where this bill is concerned, and this amendment that we are seeking to 1995 Act is an important step in that direction, and it ensures social justice and financial justice and equality to all the members of the same community, whether they're the poorest of the poor or they are right up there as the richest landlords of the land.
Shazia, now that we've seen, you spoke about the Triple Talaq ban, and also, another policy change that was brought by the BJP government, Hajj without Mehram, and there are other such reformative moves. Does it prove that the Modi government is making a genuine effort in bringing reform and changing the lives of the Muslim community?
See something like the Triple Talaq bill. I mean, something that is not even part of the Quran was being carried on in the name of religious practice in India for years. So the Muslim clerics in India were ready to go against the word of Quran only to keep the pernicious practices on. And it was BJP government which ensured that something that is in consonance with the spirit of not just the constitution but also Quran is done properly, and that women are given justice. Similarly, even where this bill is concerned, and this amendment that we are seeking to 1995 Act is an important step in that direction, and it ensures social justice and financial justice and equality to all the members of the same community, whether they're the poorest of the poor or they are right up there as the richest landlords of the land.
Okay, thank you, Shazia, for speaking with us and airing your views on this very important, sensitive subject. Bringing on Karti Chidambaram. He is Member of Parliament and he belongs to the Congress Party. Karti, thank you for joining us and speaking with us. Is the Congress Party's opposition to the Waqf bill on the principal point of polarization, or something specific in the bill is what you feel is not as per the tenets of Quran?
we have to study the bill clause by clause. We haven't had time to study it clause by clause because it was only circulated a day earlier. Something like this, which has far-reaching consequences, needs time. Parliament as a whole doesn't have the time, nor does it pay enough attention to the minor details. So the government is right in sending it to a JPC. Let the JPC be formed, and then let's go through clause by clause. Then let's also get stakeholder do stakeholder consultations. Wide consultations must be done. Feedback must be got, and then we must see what is the intent of the law. Then we'll have to see what the implications are, whether there are any provisions which are redundant from the previous legislation which can be done away with, and how can we improve it, while keeping in mind that this is a sensitive subject because it concerns religious practice. It also is a matter of faith. So there are a lot of emotive issues here. I'm not suggesting that strong legal principles which are enshrined in the Constitution must always be supreme. But we must take a holistic view. We can't rush through these things. And secondly, I always have suspicions about this government's motives, especially when they bring legislation specific to issues concerning the minorities. So we must take a holistic view, and I welcome the government's decision of sending it to a JPC. Let the JPC be formed, and then we can all air our views, and after the JPC submits a report, Parliament can consider it.
Right. We've spoken about the Joint Parliamentary Committee for further scrutiny by political leaders from all political parties. Do you think it is an encouraging move that the bill is not being passed in a rush and all stakeholders are being given time and opportunity to speak their mind about it?
Yeah, that's what I told you. First of all, the government is now conscious of its position in Parliament. They can't have a free pass because they don't have the numbers in the Rajya Sabha. So they're conscious of that, and they are reacting to that new reality, which is the verdict of India. The verdict in this last general election of 2024 is for a consultative process of lawmaking. And I'm glad the government is at least doing it as far as this bill is concerned, which has far-reaching ramification. It is a matter. It touches upon faith, it touches upon religious practice, and it is an emotive issue. So it is better to do it thoroughly and properly instead of in a rushed manner.
Now, on the issue of consultations, the BJP says that there has been a Sachar committee report and a JPC report too, which have suggested amendments in the Act. Now, how would you respond to this?
Those reports have made suggestions. Those can also be considered by this JPC. See, you must also call for wide consultations of stakeholders today. You can't rely only on historical reports, which would have been only in the context of that time. So there must be wide-ranging consultations. Yes, you can take those reports, you can take the findings of the reports, and the committee can also take that into account. But you must have contemporary consultations with stakeholders who will come and state their viewpoint.
Do you think the powers that are given to the Waqf Board are, in certain circumstances, unjust and unfair?
See, I am not an expert on how the Waqf Board functions. So if there are powers that you think are, I don't know how you can use the word unjust. If they are, we must go by the Constitution, and if there is any reform which is needed, that reform needs to carry the stakeholders along. You can't reform without considering and consulting the stakeholders.
And how do you feel about the inclusion of women, the Pasmanda Muslims and Bohras and other Muslims who are underprivileged, which has been mentioned in the amendment bill?
See, I believe that everything this is a matter of religion. Of course, women are also part of that faith, and I'm sure they can be included in it. But all these things, the composition, the constitution of the board, and everything can be discussed by the JPC, and the stakeholders can come and give their views. I'm sure they will have far-reaching hearings with all stakeholders, and stakeholders will come there. If there is progressive reform, I'm for it. But I'm not for a deep diabolical game which wants to undermine the minorities.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.